Hello, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. Thank you for tuning in for today's webinar, which is titled Simplifying 5G's Ad Tech Monetization Challenges for Carriers, presented by InMobi. The webcast is being streamed through your computer, so there is no dial-in number. For the best audio quality, please make sure your volume is up. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand within 24 hours after the event. Okay, with that, let's get on with the webinar. So I'm sure you have all attended many 5G webinars or events in the past year or so, with subjects ranging from technologies, deployments, applications, services, use cases, and so on. There were also a few on ROI, return on investment of 5G as well, but I doubt there were much on the monetization part and probably none on the ad tech aspect of 5G. So we do have an interesting and somewhat unique topic to discuss today. In the next hour or so, we will look at various aspects of ad tech for 5G operators, including what the opportunities are, what the challenges are, and how monetization ad tech can help them in solving those challenges, and what tools are out there as well. And the interesting thing we are doing today is there is no death by PowerPoint, meaning no slide presentation at all today, only discussions and Q&A. That also means as an audience, you also have a major role to play in this discussion. And you can do that by asking good questions. You can type in your questions in the question and answers tab on the left side of your screen. So let's start with some quick introduction. I'm Prakash Sangam. I'll be moderating this webinar. In terms of my background, I am the founder and principal of Tantra Analyst. We are a 3-year-old boutique tech industry analysis, research, and advisory firm covering 5G, AI, IoT, and other tech areas. I personally have more than 25 years of experience in the mobile industry, going back as 2G days. I have previously worked for AT&T, Ericsson, and Qualcomm in that order. I write for Forbes, have my own section at a pub called RCR Wireless News, and write for many other publications. I also host a podcast called Tantra's Mantra. Well, enough about me. Now let's introduce our esteemed panel who have rich background and experience in the subject matter of our webinar. I would like to request them to give a brief introduction of themselves, about their company, and their experience in ad tech. Let's start with Rajat.
Hi guys, everyone. Good morning still here for people on the West Coast, and good afternoon, folks who are joining us from the East. And of course, I don't know if there are some folks logging in from outside of states, but in which time zone you are, welcome. My name is Rajat. I'm a part of InMobi's global telco and OEM monetization business unit. I had worldwide market development for our telco and OEM, our mobile monetization business across Americas, EMEA, and APJ. We are based here in San Francisco City in the downtown, and very happy to be a part of this panel today with Fierce Wireless and our friends here at McKinsey. And so looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you, Rajat.
Thanks, Prakash. So, hi everyone, and as Rajat said, good afternoon and good morning and good evening to all the folks around who are joining us today. I'm a partner based out of New York with McKinsey. I focus all my work within TMT or for telcos, and within telcos, I lead the help telcos solve their network and consumer problems. And as a part of that, which brings me to today's discussion, is around monetization, which is the junction of with all the investment that's going in network, optimizing their return, but also helping telcos monetize the investments that they're making. So as a part of McKinsey, I also lead our thinking on network deployment as well as customer experience globally. And it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, guys. Great to have you both here. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we will take audience questions. Please do keep them coming. You can type them in the window that you see on the left side of your screen. Okay, so coming to the subject, as you all know, cellular operators are investing billions of dollars in deploying 5G networks, from buying spectrum, deploying RAN, core networks, backhaul, and everything around it. and they'll keep pouring billions more to maintain and evolve the network over the next few years. There are a few ways for operators to recoup that investment. Currently, they are primarily relying on traditional data plans. For example, many of them are offering true unlimited plans without any throttling that was there in 4G days. With that, they're also offering more expensive data plans and trying to nudge customers to those higher price data plans. And to some extent, and if you look at some of the reports from the leading operators and how they have been doing, they are to a large extent successful in nudging and pushing their customers to this higher priced data plans. But the deal is there is a limit to on how much they can do, and that cannot be the only monetization option for them. There are quite a few. Ad tech is one of the key ones that we think, and it allows them to expand the revenue streams without huge investments that they might have already done in other places. Ad tech, in simple terms, is serving ads to customers in an unintrusive way. Uh, I'm sure that is the simplistic way at looking at it. Let's check with our speakers on the details. Rajat, let's start with you on, what is ad tech? Give some, obviously, as I said, I gave a very simplistic definition of it. Why don't you tell us some details on how it works and so on?
See, InMobi defines ad tech in a bit different way than how traditional ad tech has been defined for the last 20 years. If you see the ad tech industry that came into picture around 2005, 2006, I think when DoubleClick was still DoubleClick, Accountive was still Acquantic, Yahoo was still the thing, and there were many other independent ad networks like AOL, a bunch of other private networks there. Their main job was to be a broker between the brands and then the audiences. Typical radio and television industry was a big medium for serving ads, and digital became another such medium. And of course, because the while eyeballs are like huge on the digital inventory side, of course, we had the supply always changing, chasing the demand. That is how last 20 years have evolved in ad tech. But if you come to the actual infrastructure on which this entire thing runs, which is the connectivity is provided by telcos, even by digital equipment manufacturers like Samsungs of the world or LGs of the world. Could be your TV, your tablet, or your phone. They all have looked at the underlying pipe and always try to monetize it in terms of cost per byte. Every byte that passes through my pipe, the cost is X. You pay me this monthly charge and I'll give you, let's say, 50 megs of a bandwidth. What is inside that byte was never of interest, or was probably never made interesting for the connectivity providers, which are our mobile manufacturers and telcos. Now, that one byte of data that passes on your pipe, if you're a Comcast or AT&T, it could be just an SMS you sent to your mom, or it could be a $300 purchase you made on Amazon, or it could be a $1 million house that you bought on Zillow, for example. That byte is immensely informational. If the telco or a mobile equipment manufacturer is able to participate in actually the content that resides inside the data in terms of adding value and also bringing the marketplace together, the buyers and the sellers, that is how we define ad tech. The technology that helps the connectivity providers, the telcos of the world, to participate in the commerce that happens over the pipe. It could be mobile commerce, it could be shopping commerce, it could be content commerce, and believe me or not, it could be just binge watching. If you're scrolling news feed on your phone while you're actually sitting in the train in the morning going to office, that is also commerce getting generated right there. InMobi defines ad tech as the technology suite that we have built over the last decade or so that helps carriers and manufacturers to participate in this digital commerce. We are not necessarily related to ads. We don't serve ads as the entry points of commerce, but we actually make the commerce itself the SKU. What you are trying to do on the internet, whether you are trying to swipe your card or buy something, can I participate into that commerce, make it frictionless, and take a part of that commerce away? That is really how we define ad tech at InMobi's telco services business.
Yeah.
Very well.
And I think,
Laksh, anything to add?
Yeah, definitely. I think Rajat put it really well, and I especially love the point around the telcos have not in the past done a great job at monetizing what's inside the byte. And I think there were multiple reasons, all the way from lack of availability of platforms or the computation power to even process that sheer amount of data, or looking at DPI, for example, versus what they can do now. So I think now they have the capabilities and the assets that can allow them to do this. Now, even in with all the computation power, I think what telcos are still looking forward to do is, or to be able to successfully monetize, is to be able to translate that data that they have into something more meaningful, in which can be shared or used for advertising in a privacy friendly way. So I think there's still a long way to go on that, but I totally agree with what Rajat you mentioned is the new age ad tech, right? I mean, it's gone be much beyond the classical advertiser ad exchange and publisher view of the world, to taking the slice of that data and pushing the envelope to the next level on that.
Very well. So, in this new world, as you mentioned, so what are some of the mechanisms? What are the systems that you need? What are the kinds of players that are in the ecosystem? Can you just give an overview of the whole landscape, the new landscape, if you will? I know that operators and the device vendors are looking at. Let's start with Lux this time.
Yeah. I think, especially when I think of the mobile, right, and trying to combine the old world view and Rajat's new world view definition, I think there are 7 or 8 key players that I see between the. At the end of the day, it's the advertiser and the publisher, right? And
Mhm.
then it's in between that you can take it to the next level, or use the traditional way. So when I think of what players are in between the advertiser and in between the publisher, I think the first, coming from the publisher, the first block for me is part of the what I would call the supply side platforms. Now there are a bunch of platforms all the way from, there is, I would say there's MobClick, Rubicon, like all the traditional, some of the platforms that exist. There's also the players around what I would then call the ad servers. Now this is OpenX and DoubleClick, and there are a bunch of ad servers in the traditional world that existed, but still relevant. And let's talk about how this will evolve going forward as well. And then you have the a big block that used to be the traditional world of data suppliers. Now this is also where the telcos have a new role to play. This is where in the traditional world you would think of even Nielsen, Comscore, and players like that traditionally, and with limited role and or some role coming from telcos. Now that is where the telcos, especially with the third party data coming in an influx, and with Apple, the cookies and the third party sources going away, telcos have a much bigger role to play in this space, as well as expand from the sub data provider or data suppliers into other areas. Now, this is not just about the packet going away. This now will include also location based data, for example, in obviously a privacy friendly way. Then then you have the traditional ad networks. This is AdMob, InMobi, Google, and the Yahoos of the world, right? Is where these guys come in. And then what I find interesting is basically what I would call the geospatial networks. Now this is again a bit of, I talked about the location data coming from telco, and then there is some of the other players that like Navteo that play in this area, and then eventually you move to the DSPs or the demand side platforms, and eventually the media buyers or the Havas Media and all the players who are on the media buying side, all the way to the advertiser. So that's, I would say, the full ecosystem, on the mobile side.
Yeah, so I think that's a great explanation on how things are. As users or simple telecom engineers, you don't really realize the things that happen behind that, right? All you see is what comes on the screen and how that comes about. But it's the word behind that screen is really impressive and interesting. So in this scheme of things, where does the value is situated, where the most of the value is situated, and how and who are the beneficiaries of that value?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, as yeah, I think as we lost Roger briefly, I can take over that question. I think,
Great, thank you.
as we think of where the value lies, I think there are a few few places where I see the value coming in.
Mm-hmm.
One is the new age. When we think of the new age data, or being able to connect the customers or the end customers and identifying what they need, and
Mm-hmm.
being and translating that all the way, connecting that to the advertiser, is op- basically, I would say, not just operators but any player who's able to do that, it will be able to, or is able to, monetize that the most, and
Mm-hmm.
can bring the most value into the ecosystem. Now that could be a telco. Traditionally, it's not been a telco. These have been players beyond telcos, I would say. But as the ecosystem is evolving, this is where I see a huge opportunity to be played over there.
Very well, thank you. Welcome back, Rajat. So we're discussing the ecosystem as well as who are the key players and where the maximum value stands in the whole value chain and the ecosystem. So I mean, as Lux says, whoever can understand the consumer demand point of view and match that with the right content, that's where the maximum value lies. So any comment from your side about the ecosystem or the value?
See, the in traditional advertising scenario,
Mm-hmm.
the demand and supply were always balanced, and supply was always in the excess. In the connected world, it's extremely hard to create supply. Extremely hard, because your supply has to reside on a tangible surface, like your connected home device, like your mobile phone, like your smart refrigerator, or like Alexa, for example, in your home. It's like an audio supply of its source. The world has completely changed in the new age of ad tech. The supply is always constrained, and it's the demand that is chasing the supply. If I go out to the street and I just shout, "Hey, I have 1 million consumers who are looking to buy shoes, anybody interested?" And if there's an API that is exposed out there, the API will get filled in less than a minute, with people, the brands, private labels flogging that API because they want to access that demand. They want to access those users.
Yeah, I think we are having some technical difficulties with connecting with Rajat. So we'll give him a couple of more minutes to
Yeah.
reset and come back online. Well, we can move on to the next question while you prepare. So as you mentioned, I think Laksh as well and Rajat mentioned as well that in what happened in 4G was OTT players took all of the value, or if not most of the value, and operators were relegated to just dumb pie providers to the users, and the OTT players would basically make the most benefits. I think operators obviously have realized that and learned their lessons. When it comes to 5G, they are now determined to not give away any of that, at least most of the value to others and not just be dumb pie providers. So there is huge amount of affinity towards understanding more of on how they can leverage the abilities that they have to monetize as well as create revenue streams.
Yeah.
How does ad tech can help them in that effort? I mean, generally we can understand, but what are the some specific ways how they can, use the leverage that they have in connecting with the customers, with the huge amount of information that they have over the customers, their behaviors, their locations, as you mentioned, and other things to make to bring best value for themselves, not letting the OTT players take it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, and I think the I think we need to, if we fast forward the movie a bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know the conclusion is still out there yet,
Mm-hmm.
and time will tell if operators are fully able to monetize this, and how they treat this differently than the 4G era.
Mm-hmm.
However, given the amount of investment that is going in, and it's so capex intensive, you're right. Like, telcos are very aggressively looking at options to, or opportunities to monetize 5G. Now, 5G provides a few additional features, or let's say capabilities, that allow telcos to really differentiate and charge or monetize things differently. So that varies all the way from not just high bandwidth, but all the way from low latency, and especially I think something interesting is around slicing, right? So how they
Hmm.
will use network slicing in there. Now, when I think of all of that, imagine now in the world where telcos have not just data about what the customers are doing, but they have contextual data about with depending on what plans the customers are on and what slice they're running on, and and that allows them to, for example, use AR VR solutions, or they're into AR VR gaming, or they're using different kind of applications. Now with access to that, the level of contextualization that the telcos can do using that data and play a bigger role is phenomenal, right? It's the opportunity is huge. This is a minimal incremental investment as we see this, to basically monetize all that information that they now have, and and being able to monetize, I mean, compared to what they've done traditionally, this will be a totally new area of revenues in addition to what the telcos would be doing. So thinking of verticals, thinking of, let's say, what I would call solutions or enablers, like computer vision, traditional AR VR content that they're going ahead with, and they will be pushing in with healthcare and so on. This is all on top of that. So this is, they don't have to wait to monetize ad tech and get into ad tech. This is something that is a low, I would call it a relatively low hanging fruit once you have the right technology in place.
Perfect. So since we got Rajat back, maybe we can complete what you are saying in terms of where the value lies and how to make best use of it. And the next question that I was asking Laksh was, how operators take the best value out of their 5G networks versus in 4G OTT folks, to call the value.
Yeah, no, I think the how part of it is most important. How do you actually do that? How do telcos create that hook and the gateway of the 5G
Mm-hmm.
monetization? But maybe just giving 30 seconds to the value creation part too. See, what
Mm-hmm.
we said is in the earlier days of ad tech, which was maybe 3, 4 years ago, and continuing even till now, all the digital ad tech that we have seen, every kind of digital inventory, whether it was web or mobile or connected TV, or any kind of digital inventory, it was always supply was overburdening the demand. There was too much supply out there in the digital world. And that's why we saw many of the exchanges, which were supply side only exchanges, they kind of devalued a lot because it's just too much supply floating around and demand is not that high. And demand always wants to choose supply that is precise, that is disseminating, and that performs. And there's very limited amount of supply that performs, and that is layered with really contextual high-end data, private marketplaces of the sorts, and they guarantee performance. Everything else was really the long tail, but it then clutters the environment. On the telco side, it is reverse. It is always the demand that changes supply, which means the supply is constrained. There's just this much of a supply that is available on a telco network, which is just your device. On your device, also certain entry points on the device. This is precise, this is deterministic, and demand is chasing this supply. The value that is getting created is I, as the owner of the supply, whether I'm a Samsung or let's say I'm a Verizon of the world, I'm going to give this supply in a most pristine way along with the data that overlays it to a brand to kind of interact with this user in a very privacy safe, compliant environment, clean environment, have the transaction take place in a trusted way, and just use that cohort to do more of what they always want to do. There's no clutter over there. This is the value creation of a telco, and we feel nobody is really paying attention to it. The duopolies of the world, these ad tech giants of the world, they have deliberately kept telcos away from the digital monetization piece for vested reasons. But if the telco jumps into this monetization with certain unique properties, which we call as surfaces, the kind of things that InMobi does, we think telco has a phenomenal chance of participating into that commerce from get-go. They don't need anybody. They have the device, they have the identifier, they know who the user is, where the user lives, they have access and the device control, they take care of the data and the security of the backend. They also know about identity of the users. Try depending upon IDFA, whether you're an iOS user. Try depending upon Google IDs if you're an Android user. What about your smart TV, connected TV, if you're using a Roku box versus a Samsung TV? It's a cluttered environment. But if you are connected to the IP gateway of the network that is provided by your IP provider, I actually have a unique ID for you. And I really don't need any of these overlaying transitory identifiers to make the transaction happen. That's the value creation part. Very quickly on the how part of it, I think the how is important because if you look at 5G and you look at all the devices that are connected to the edge, whether it's your mobile phone or your wearable or your smart fridge or your connected car or an Alexa at home, they need to have some kind of a surface on which the transaction takes place. If you look at Amazon.com, the homepage, that is the search engine to find anything in the world. That is the new Google if you want to find products. That Amazon homepage is exactly what Alexa is on the audio world. That's a surface. They have given you a surface. You can talk to it. You can ask anything. You can buy anything. InMobi has created a very unique platform called Swish that creates these surfaces on devices of choice that telcos can distribute. And then telcos become the Amazon homepage of the world in a very loose manner. And that is the entry point for where every kind of commerce will begin on the device.
Very well. So, I mean, if ad tech is so great as you're saying, operators are still in the process of adopting them and such. What are the key challenges that is stopping them from adopting and then start earning money, right? Who do not want to start earning money sooner? So, what are the challenges from your point of view, Rajat?
There are three main challenges. First challenge is, see, telcos are very regulated players. They are topics of national importance for even governments in certain situations. There are things that you cannot expect a telco to do, and that is in terms of privacy, in terms of compliance, in terms of data. It's not an easy world for them. What a Facebook can do and be in front of the Congress, it's very hard for a telco to be in that situation. Number second is, technologically speaking, the entire digital industry was created outside of the telco environment. It was created for advertisers. Entire digital industry is very advertiser first. All the KPIs, SLAs were built for performance metrics of how advertisers wanted to spend their dollars. A telco's business is consumer first. It is giving a service to the consumer. It's not about an advertiser business. These worlds are very different fundamentally. They have never coincided well. If a large telco goes and buys the largest internet company of the world 10 years ago, and in 10 years finds, hey, we don't think it is synergetic with what we are doing, I think that's a learning curve of where internet was created outside of the consumer business. And we are still in a very pristine virgin business. We want to stay true to delivering consumer service. And number third is the technology itself. Imagine the largest demand side, supply side, and even the exchange platforms of the world. Who has created them? Who owns them? Who owns the underlying data? This has always been a problem for telcos, that should I go and buy an ad tech platform and then try to run a business on top of it, which I've never run in past, or should I partner with the ad tech platform? But hey, then the ad tech platform takes away 80% of the value which I'm capturing through my users, and my name is still on the line. All these three are major challenges that people are trying to save together.
All right, thank you. Laksh, anything to add?
Yeah, I think when I think of operators, right, I think one of the big challenges beyond, I mean, I agree everything with what Rajat said. I think one of the big challenges is just being able to run that business and having the right mindset. And I think if we look at Xander, right, with AT&T is a classic case study. I think they started with a very grand vision, and I think the concept was amazing, and they wanted to monetize the data, and then it was also folded into Warner Media. But I think there's more left to be done on that space, and I don't think they were able to achieve the full potential through that. So you can allocate that a bit to, I would say, the mindset and the operating model. So I think telcos still need to figure out the operating model, which is going to be not their traditional telco operating model, to really succeed in that. So there is a part of operating model / business model. Then the other part I would just add is, especially when it comes to making ad tech work for telco, there is also another part of the mindset shift that is related to security. And I think security is going to continue to be a key theme as we talk through this conversation, which is telcos are inherently more regulated than many of the third-party data providers or the third-party other players, given the kind of data and accesses that they have. So working around that and making sure we have the technology and the platform and the willingness to take on that and address those challenges is going to be very critical. So they will. I mean, I think these are certain things that they need to address in addition to what Rajat was mentioning.
So, in other words, you're saying if an operator wants to build their own ad tech, not just business, the whole ecosystem themselves because they have access to it, and then offer it to advertisers, then you're saying there are a lot of hurdles for doing that, right? If I understand correctly, and the regulations is one, and the culture and the background on which they work are the other things, right?
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay. Okay, and then it reminds me, Verizon bought Yahoo as well, and they tried to make a business out of it, and couldn't, and then the valuation dropped like crazy, Yahoo's, and then they ultimately sold it. So that also, gives us a good history lesson on how not to do things and how the things should be done in a better way, right? So that's interesting to point out. Um, so, is this situation generally the same across the globe, or is it more regional? And if you go to say other developed worlds, be it Europe or some place in Asia like Japan, Korea, Singapore, and when you compare that to US, how difference there is in terms of the challenges, the ecosystem, how the operating model, and so on. Let's
There
start
is
with Rajat this time.
there is a tremendous amount of delta. And I can tell you that when we build an IP, we always believe in the ideal situation that IP should be repeatable. You can give it to a customer and they can just use it with minimal tweaks. It should be out of the box working. That's what the R&D expenses can be really recovered. But if you look at the telco space, if you look at US and Canada, and if you look at, let's say, India and Indonesia, the device to ARPU ratio is a very key metric that we use to decide what service offerings in one market will work versus not. People have not figured it out. Making a surface on a device, that technology is not a difficult thing. A telco can put 50 engineers and build some experience on the device. The problem is, how are you going to monetize it in a very different environment? Look at India and US. In US, you have an ARPU that is close to around, let's say, $70. And typical device price is $400. Look at India or Indonesia. Device price is still $400. ARPU is $4. People still buy $300 device. They love it. ARPU is $4. Well, you imagine, and that's the same for equipment manufacturers, by the way. If you have a Samsung or an Ericsson network setup, well, the cost is not too much different if you buy it in Western world versus Eastern world. Now, a telco gets only $4 of a top line. OEM actually made more or less the same amount of money by selling the device here. How much of an additional service can you provide to the same user? It can transcend the ARPU 300 times in a market that is smaller versus adding only marginal utility in a mature market over here. But in the mature market, that marginal utility is frictionless experience for which people are willing to stay with the carrier. It's a zero sum game here in US. There are three carriers, and the churn numbers. Every kind of there's no new addition to there's no next 1 billion coming over here. So retention and affinity that service provides here versus the ARPU game that it provides in the Western world, those services will look very different. They will be consumed very differently, and they will be built very differently. That is very important for a provider like ourselves.
Laksh, anything to
Yeah,
add?
yeah, fully agree. I know I keep going back to regulation, but I think that's especially when you look at how things are evolving across Europe, US, China, and the way the regulation and the regime are working out are very different, and seems like they're diverging more and more each day. So with that being an increasingly differentiating factor, even beyond on top of the fact that the ARPU and the monetization models and what the consumption and customer desire are different, there's also a pressure from that side. And then there's another thing I would say from when we think of the ad tech ecosystem itself, while it is the connected e-commerce, everything is connected, and a lot of the inventory is going to be might be common, but the localized business models may still vary, right? And then a non-ad tech example is the amount of investment, for example, that Netflix did in Korean content, right? So I think that's the local content or the local inventories might is something that will be still different, and all the within the ad tech ecosystem, you still want to consider and see where does the inventory come and go, and as the players within the ecosystem might be slightly different beyond the
Mhm.
global, the standard players.
So we'll quickly go towards. I mean, we talk mostly from the business and the operator side. Let's take a quick look at from the user side as well, right? And there is huge disparity between a user in the US, in say in India, for example, as Rajat you pointed out. In the US, they pay like 50 to $60 for their monthly subscription, whereas $4 or $5 in India. So when you're trying to serve the ads, uh, the friction that you'll encounter in US is much different and higher than say in India, right? So you have to adapt to that as well. How any views on from your side on how to make ad tech non-intrusive and smooth and seamless as much as possible?
Yeah,
Certainly close.
definitely.
Okay, yeah, go
Definitely.
ahead. Yeah.
See, like 5G has introduced network slicing just to make the infrastructure more aware of the applications that are actually
Mhm.
going on top of it, and then give them the quality of service that application really needs in runtime. Ad tech that InMobi builds exactly follows the same canonical architecture. You don't serve ads to people as a fundamental means of monetizing the service. There's enough ads floating around and enough targeting getting done by Google and Facebooks of the world. We are trying to create a frictionless commerce. Now, in order to subsidize that frictionless commerce in an Asian market, we support them, supplement them with ads, which subsidize that commerce for them. In US, you don't need to do that. We don't need to subsidize commerce here in US or in Europe or in Australia or in Japan or in Korea. Even if you go to Canada, for example, over there, these are pretty native economies. Where the device, the commerce, the transaction, if you're a Robinhood user and you're like stock trading, well, that itself is an economy. I don't need to show you 5 rewarded videos to get you into the Robinhood ad. There are companies that were built in a very monolithic way whose only job is to serve ads. They are basically ad aggregating networks, whether it's programmatic or direct. They only know about serving ads. And they have cluttered the mobile device monetization space a lot over the last multiple years. And they face this problem. They say, hey, our ads are hated in some markets. Some people are okay seeing ads in different markets. Well, because ads is not the vehicle for making money. It is what is happening on the device that you should concentrate on. Use ads to subsidize some of those transactions in some markets where subsidy is important. That's all we're saying.
Lak, anything to add?
No, I think Rajat nailed this one to the T. So
Very well. So let's make it a little bit easy for the audience to understand. Can you explain an example of of an ad that could be served, how it would be served in US to US consumer versus one in India, and how the things would be different from both user as well as the network point of view? Who wants to take that?
Maybe Lakshya, go ahead.
yeah, so I think that's
Could
an
be anything,
interesting
and it could be
question. Yeah.
hypothetical as well, not really, just so that the contrast is easy for people to understand.
I think more from I'd start from the content of that, the objective and the content itself of it, and then let's go into the details.
Uh-huh.
So to Rajat's point, right, it's really about when you talk about the high ARPU markets like the US, and where you want to make sure where the focus is more about seamless and an integrated experience between ad tech and martech.
Hmm.
You're talking about an ad where the you're trying to get the customer or the end user
Hmm.
more seamless, which is you would talk about I would talk about more about the features of if I'm
Hmm.
trying to push any kind of product. You're talking more about the features and the benefits and let them use or let them experience those features. Then versus if I talk about the developing markets, and we took the example of India, where more than the feature, I would focus more on the offer itself. I think there's a difference in what you would focus on versus the which is the capability and features versus I would focus on the pricing versus and the offer which I'm giving to the end user. That's those are, I think, from a consumer's perspective, those are the two big differences that I personally feel within the two markets.
Okay, very well. Is there anything to add or?
No, I think that's perfect actually. That's right.
Okay. Okay. And then another thing that comes into action is user privacy, security, and such. How can operators and the whole ecosystem can address that their information, whatever is being used for serving ads and so on, is protected and not shared across, and even if it's shared, it's anonymized and such. So what are the tools and what are the things in place to make sure that gives the surety to the users that they are not the product, right? I mean, it's basically right. So any views on that? Let's start with Rajat.
I think I would like to add two very important points over here. We
Mm,
always request people who are in very nuanced industries. For example, if you're in healthcare, you don't want to mess around with HIPAA, for example, right? If
okay.
you are in a telco industry, or even if you are a mobile manufacturer, you don't want to mess around with FTC, FCC, and also the TRA guidelines that sit on top of you. Problem is that the entire monetization piece, the ad tech piece, the internet commerce piece was built outside in a very unregulated environment 20 years
Mm-hmm.
ago. And there were companies that were like 5 guys sitting in a garage trying to write a programmatic code to basically put some banner ads on some websites. Everything is unregulated. The supply is unregulated, the demand is unregulated, the tech is unregulated. You can play around with the data in as much variables as you want. The limited ad tracking feature that Apple kind of started off back in around a decade ago, that was really geared about stopping unregulated intrusions into a regulated environment. And this is what we keep telling everybody, that if you look at some unique products, and InMobi is just one of them, there are a bunch of other products out there. Nobody's perfect. We're also trying to solve a problem that's long due. But when we did the deal with Sprint in 2018 in US, we were probably one of the first ad tech companies that went out and acquired assets from a telco. Historically, everybody has seen telco acquiring ad tech assets. It was the first time that we actually went and we acquired assets from a telco. We came in touch with all the three-letter agencies here in the US, FCC, FTC, Department of Justice, even CFIUS, and we had to rewrite the entire block of IP that we had built over the last many, many years to ground up, we built telco out. Ingestion, consumption, commerce, everything needs to stay in these gardens very, very, very pristinely. It has to comply bottoms up with all the regulators, and also on top of it, all the policies that the telco itself may have, by virtue of having their own TNCs with their own customers. This kind of infrastructure does not and cannot exist outside, because everything that exists outside is unregulated and super optimized for outcome, and that causes tweaks. That is why you had IDFA come in, because people are trying to make it more safe, secure. Of course, they have monetization vested interest in it, but ultimately you can't do away with privacy and security, which we are trying to solve, just being inside a telco environment and going out from here, rather coming from outside and trying to tap in.
Very well. Laksh, anything to add?
No, I think
Okay,
this
cool.
makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So one of the audience questions. So we know since 5G is going across the board, right? It's not just a telecom technology anymore. It's going to be part of each and every industry as such. Do you see or expect some relaxation of regulation for operators to do more, some of this stuff that they have to go get it done by third party, or any views there?
I
Or
can
you
take
have to work with the regulations we have now and then try to work around them or whatever to address the issue.
Yeah, I personally don't see regulations getting eased out because the telcos are investing capex in 5G. There is
Mm-hmm.
definitely a lot of, let's say, push from the regulators as well as the governments, right, in the race to 5G.
Yeah.
And some countries are already ahead, and many countries are still investing and getting there. So that push will continue, and there may be subsidies and support from operators in different ways, and allowing them network sharing, right? So there are different ways operators will be helped by regulators and by, I would say, the public sector. But when it comes to the question of data or customer data, or the question of ad advertising, I would say regulators are more on the conservative side, and rightly so. That's where you're moving, and we talked a lot about privacy and security. So I think those themes will continue to prevail, and if anything, right? I mean, the regulators may get even more conservative, and regulations might get even tighter when it comes to security and privacy of data. But I don't see any relaxation on that front coming to operators.
Rajat, any views there?
No, I think we, as Laksh mentioned, and I'm sure McKinsey works with a lot of these, superior bodies who are trying to redefine how marketplace should look like. But what I think it is a little bit of a reverse effect too. If you are an unregulated player trying to enter 5G and try to get connected, like if you're a smart car manufacturer and if you have a SIM card inside your car who tries to connect to a an edge network, you have to actually do more than what you were supposed to do in an all IP flat architecture. So I think you will try to see some of these regulations coming into those people who have been safely able to sit outside of that in 4G. They will be a little bit more tied to the specifications and privacy guidelines when it comes to 5G because everybody's sharing the same data from the edge.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so let's now move back to the operator point of view and systems point of view. So if operators want to basically get onto the new age ad tech, what do they need to do? If they want to start it today, what are the steps they need to take to make it happen?
I think there are three things that come to mind,
Mm-hmm,
right? And it all stems from the addressing the challenges that we talked about. I think
mm-hmm,
the first one is they need a technology startup mindset, which is
mm-hmm.
yes, they've tried their hands at ad tech in the past. You really need to change the mindset, and the speed to market that is needed to succeed in this business is totally different. It is very different from being a traditional telco versus winning in ad tech. So there is a mindset and an operating model shift that they need, which is test, fail fast, learn, start again. They need to get in that cycle in a very quick way, which is not typical of operators, right? So that's one. The second thing is operators need to understand or expand their right or define their right to play or their role within the industry, and this is going to happen through could happen through partnerships and developing the technological capabilities to be able to monetize or capture that information within those data packets in a way that is security or regulatory compliant. And then the last one I would say is they definitely need to figure out also or come up with different business models or monetization models and how they will be charging for this, and that may vary by different markets, and they may have they may want to come up with different options that suit different needs of the kind of players or customers that they're targeting.
Very well. Rajat?
I think one thing that has been really close to our hearts whenever we have spoken to telcos, and of course has been probably the foundation stone of the portfolio that we are taking to market this coming year, is telcos should not be in a business of becoming the marketplace. Don't compete with Amazon, don't compete with Google, don't compete with Spotify, don't compete with Amazon Prime. Just be a gateway to everything. You guys have a phenomenal entry point of actually being the gateway. Rather being a marketplace and then competing with the marketplaces out there, just have the technology and the partnerships in place that make you to the gateway of any kind of interaction that is happening on the device. That is what we are building for them, and I think that's why a frictionless environment, which is non-replicable, by the way. Just don't go head on against everybody else. Be a gateway to internet.
Okay. So, I mean, this is not just, new way of thinking, but you have to have new kind of structure in place, organization structure, skill set, competencies, people and all that stuff, right? Do you think they are ready there, or did they have to start right now, or they have to start yesterday? And how do you see? Obviously, there will be differences in terms of geographical regions in how good they can do it or how good they can adapt to this changing situation. What is your read on at what stage operators are, across the world in making this happen. Laksh?
So traditionally, I would say the operators have traditional operators are not structured to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And however, many of them are changing, are evolving. They are developing new capabilities around software development, new capabilities around next generation marketing. So, and becoming much more agile. So there are select few, or I would say handful of operators globally who are already moving in that direction to develop, to be agile enough to run this business. But there's a lot more that they need to develop, as you mentioned, Prakash, especially across those capabilities, having the right, being organized in the right way, right? So that they need to have the lines of business defined as to be able to support this. They need to have the talent to be able to support this, to become the gateway, as Rajat was mentioning, to be able to execute on that. They need to have people who can manage that ecosystem or partnerships. They need the right skill set and the savvy, technology savvy people and workforce who can actually manage that platform, even if it's through a partnership. They need to have those capabilities to be able to run that. And right now operators are not there. And I think, to your point, like you said, I like how you said it, which is they had to start yesterday. And I think, especially if I think of the markets in North America, where 5G is already, we're already pushing through 5G. Korea is already, I mean, was all pretty much a first mover in that.
Mm-hmm.
So all that is, all that said, I think there's opportunity. There is still time. Operators can still get in it and win it. But that is why I think the right partnerships will be critical to get to it in time.
Hey, I wanted to ask Rajat another question. Okay, while wait for Rajat to come back online. So there is a question here. How does ad tech work in a private network setting? It's a lot of action happening on private networks. Uh, any views there on how it would work,
Yeah,
or what are the considerations?
of course. So when I think of private network, for me, private network is a, and 5G private networks, or even virtual private networks for that matter, that
Mm-hmm.
for me is a B2B construct, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the where will we need to, when we to answer that question, we need to spend 10 seconds on what is the purpose, or what will be the purpose of private networks. Private networks will be, I see them being deployed by large enterprises to
Mm-hmm.
support their operations, right? So we've seen case studies of rail organizations. We've seen case studies of large manufacturers setting up private networks. GM, for example, recently set up theirs. So in those the use cases of private networks are to support those enterprises and their internal connectivity and their networks. What to monetize or ad tech, or to basically, this monetization is a more B2C construct, where we are
Correct.
talking about reaching out to the end user on their mobile devices. So I don't
Correct.
see private network impacting or being, you know, changing the construct of how we go to the customer, when, especially when the slicing is there, or even when the consumer is connected, you're with your business phone connected to maybe a private network which was, let's say, meant for a manufacturing company. You should still be able to get ads served, if that, especially given that we're doing it through the telcos. And the last thing I would add is, if anything, private networks, yes, you have the OEMs playing in the private networks, as well as you have the telcos. And I think telcos have a natural right to play in private networks and manage those private networks,
Mm-hmm.
for the companies that they're, and enterprises that they're deploying that for. So telcos still have the same accesses, and it only adds to the data that they could access. Of course, given it will be a private network owned by, an enterprise, I'm not sure if they will be access to privy to all that
Correct.
information and share it publicly.
Correct. Yeah. Thank you. So, Rajat, going back to when we were discussing about this organization and how prepared the operators are, and I think one key thing is to partner with the right solution providers who have been doing it, like InMobi, for example. So, what are your views on what is the most efficient, fastest way for operators to get into ad tech and get rolling right away rather than going through the steep curve, learning curve, if you will?
The fastest way for telcos to start monetizing this as we move from 4G to 5G, and even this 5G it still has a long tail of next 2 to 3 years, is to
Right.
have an underlying technology and an infrastructure so that you can support any kind of marketplace and be the gateway of it for your end consumers. Which means you need to have a buy side stack, you need to have a sell side stack, you need to have a data stack, and you need to have some kind of a buying engine, which means a marketplace of sorts, an exchange in a traditional ad tech world, if I call. All this put together, you can put any kind of marketplace on top of it. It could be Amazonish like marketplace, or Amazon Prime like marketplace, or a gaming marketplace, for example, or even crypto is coming, an FT is coming, a bunch of other things. You need to have this underlying ad tech stack. That is number one, which exists, something that we have built. And I say there are other companies who do it as well, but something that we have built grounds up. On top of that, they need to have the pipes which are important for this marketplace to sustain. Like the simplest problem to solve is write the code for Android operating system. A telco can get up and say, I can write a better code for my devices than Android OS. Why will anybody buy that operating system if the apps don't exist on top of it? If the marketplace doesn't exist, nobody, people have challenges without marketplace of writing underlying infrastructure. You can give them the sleekest of the device with the best operating system. If there are no apps, what will I do with that thing? That is exactly the ad tech problem we are solving. We are saying we own one of the second largest marketplaces in the world. We already have the infrastructure, which is a great partnership with Microsoft that we have turned out to be running everything in a single cloud, the tenant, the buy side, sell side stack, everything in a single tenant. And we also have the operating system, which is Swish, which is the surfaces that can sit on your connected TV or your connected fridge or your car or your mobile device. And then on top of it, you can basically be the gatekeeper of the marketplace, like Google does in loose terms with the App Store, and get paid for everything that happens there. That's the exact model we are trying them to roll out with us.
And you have worked with operators elsewhere outside US with these models and been successful, right?
Yes, yes. I think EMEA, for example, is really turning around. Asia has been our home ground. We are live there on 300 million plus devices through our partnerships with OEMs. And we are also seeing a lot of traction from large opcodes that are based in Europe, because they have their businesses spread out in various countries which are demographically and economographically very different. And they need to have some kind of a repeatable solution that can adjust to the kind of marketplace that succeeds in that particular market. So yeah, good traction. Again, we are not perfect. We're perfecting this, but we hope we'll go there.
Yeah, I think the bottom line is it has been tried and tested, and there are some good case studies of successes in doing it for operators who are not there yet to learn from, right? So that's great. So we are almost hitting the time. I think this will be my last question. So thinking of, I'm hoping you guys brought your crystal ball today to the panel. So it's about the future. If we are sitting in a conference or an event like this, say five years from now, where do you see the ad tech market and ecosystem be? How mature would be, how advanced would it be, or some based on your thinking, based on your vision and the crystal ball that you probably have. Let's start with Laksh.
Let's say four key things or key themes, right, that I see
Mhm.
continuing into 2026 and still being and being even more relevant. The first one I would say is around privacy and transparency. So brands, marketeers, agency, platforms, telcos. I think all of them would need to work together to create an ecosystem that will be privacy compliant. And I think with the regulations that are already in motion, it's going to be super relevant. Even from a consumer's perspective, that is, things are changing. I mean, the future is going to be around ethical advertising, which is providing the right transparency around privacy and transparency options and features to the customer. So basically, advertisers need to be we need to be ready to adopt tactics that allow the, let's say, changing the ability and allow the new identity signals to come in. What I mean by that is the users will be able to more and more choose what they want to share and what they don't want to share, and we need to be prepared for that. That's one. The second thing I would say is the big shift that's already started and with the third party data, right, and ability to use that data. So one, we talked about how granular data telcos have and can be used in the future. So I see telcos and the real data holders being even more relevant. And there will be a shift from what I see from a third party providers that were earlier being providing this data to a bit more on the telco. I think telcos will play a much more, I'd say, relevant AI to actually run this platform is amazing. And the last two I would say is quickly is there's going to be a continued push towards outcome based advertising, which is moving from programmatic to now you're able to measure experience and measure different metrics in a much more granular way. So that will continue to push. And lastly, new forms of advertising would emerge, which is based on AR, VR, and I think those forms will be even more prevalent as those video forms become prevalent in customer usage.
All right, Rajat, quickly, the time you have.
I think you just touched such a sensitive topic for us, and we are so neck deep into redefining how ad tech would look like 5 years from now. But I'll probably give it just a 30-second spin. I would
Mm-hmm.
say our imagination of ad tech 5 years from now is a complete M2M infrastructure. There are no people involved watching ads, clicking on ads, and trying to buy something online. It's your smart refrigerator, which has an SDK inside it. It goes and looks into the fridge. It says, hey, you're running out of fruit. It calls upon an API, Swish API on your fridge, and that sends a signal to your car. And your car, if it's passing next to a store, will actually place an order with the storekeeper, and you can just do a curbside pickup. It's very simple. It needs to be powered by edge, that is billion-dollar investment by telcos. So we are requesting them to be a part of this commerce. But I would see people getting out of this commerce, and it would be basically a device-to-device commerce. And it's not even hard to imagine, as I said that even now.
Okay, yeah, that seems like an interesting situation to be in, that things happen on their own without your active participation, things get done. That's cool. I think we are on the dot now. That was the last question, as I mentioned. Let me thank you both for an engaging and informative session. And of course, thanks to the audience for joining our discussion and coming up with lots of interesting questions. Unfortunately, we could not get to all of them. And indeed, it was great for me to moderate this webinar. The recorded version of the webinar will be available at the same link within next 24 hours. With that, thank you again and hope to catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.